Jean, Carol, welcome. We're here today to spend some time talking all things HTA Policy Futures. So HTA Policy Futures is a new construct, new concept. It's super exciting, quite scary as well. It will be new. We've worked as a team very hard over the last few months, years even, bringing the concept to the point of launch. One of the programs that we have within HTA Policy Futures is HTAtalks, and it's all about using podcasts and Zoom and webinars to articulate, communicate, debate, ideate, get consensus on the themes that will run through HTA Policy Futures, which we'll find out about in a minute because we need to explain to our audience and probably to ourselves a little bit about what HTA Policy Futures is. So that's our jumping in point for our initial discussion. It's not going to be super prescriptive because I know you guys, and once we ask one question, an hour will pass very quickly. But I think that's what we want to do is to, collectively we've got decades of experience working across the entire life sciences ecosystem. So I think we'll have a lot to discuss, and we'll be able to articulate why HTA Policy Futures and kind of why now. But before we do that, I'm not sure you do need to be introduced, but it might be worth us just saying who we are and what we do and why we're here. So I'll maybe start with Jean.
I'm Jean Mossman. My background is running a cancer patient organisation, and I met Eric when he set up Myeloma UK and have worked with him through the year. And I'm very excited to be involved in HTA Policy Futures.
Thanks, Jean.
I'm Carol Longson. I'm now an independent advisor in health technology assessment and market access, having spent over 20 years now in HTA as an executive director at NICE and running technology appraisals and the other technology evaluation programs. My interest in HTA Policy Futures is one that really does excite me because there aren't many mechanisms where I can think outside the box. So that's where I want to send this conversation today.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm Eric Lowe. As Jean said, I've been involved in working with and for patient groups in my entire career. I started very young. I think I was nine years old when I first met you. And but since 2017, been running a very small consultancy advising companies on evidence generation, HTA market access, pricing, medicines optimization, all of that good stuff. But one of the privileges and benefits of working at Myeloma UK is we had a whole systems model. We didn't just look at diagnosis or prevention, or we just didn't look at research. We looked across the entire life sciences spectrum, and we could see the gaps. It was not a slick model at all. There was huge gaps. People were working and thinking in silos. It was very obvious that there was a bunch of vested interests in different incentives and different rewards, and it became hard to understand how anything came out the other end that anyway resembled effective and safe treatments for patients. And of course, the more you jump into that ecosystem, the more scary it gets with the number of different actors, stakeholders, investors, and academics, and spin-outs, and investment capital people all trying to get their bit. And so it's crazy. There was no common goal. There was tons of these vested interests. There was all kinds of incentives, like quite high incentives in some places, but that drove decision making that didn't always stack up to deliver from patients. So we're at Myeloma UK, we tried to build a new ecosystem architecture just for myeloma that tried to reconcile all of that by connecting demand and supply a little bit, by using patient evidence and system evidence to drive supply, and trying very hard to put structures and constructs and money in the right place to change behavior in a way that would deliver for industry and deliver for academia, but most importantly could also deliver for patients, because the system was really not set up to deliver for patients. But it was hard. It was really, really, really hard, and you needed to be super brave and courageous and resilient. So I had the idea of HTA Policy Futures. I've had it for 20 years because there was a limit to what myeloma could do as a single disease. We could only change the myeloma ecosystem, which I think we did in the UK It was tough, there was tears, people tried to kill it. Some people signed up to it, but it was a little bit ahead of its time. And I don't say that arrogantly, it was just frustratingly ahead of its time. So HTA Policy Futures, in essence, is a more macro version of what we tried to achieve at Malum UK, which is looking at the entire life sciences ecosystem or continuum and thinking about where does it work, where does it not work. But when you look at it, and we've talked about this, it's complex. It's like, it's in that too hard to fix box. It's like, where would you start? And then it suddenly becomes obvious is once you get involved in HTA particularly, that is the best jumping in point for that exploration of what happens left and right of HTA. And HTA sort of is like equidistant between demand and supply. So what HTA Policy Futures is a construct that allows us to bring all of the different actors and all of the different stakeholders together into an academic, methods-driven, trusted environment to share, to get insights, to debate, to ideate, to challenge, and understand all the different vested interests and drivers to try and come out the other side with what we would describe is implementable and transactable solutions to some of the problems in the ecosystem, and to maximize the potential that it has, which we don't do because it follows the money. It's not about creating value. It follows the money, and patients don't get this maximum benefit from the available innovation in the ecosystem. So that's the driver behind HTA Policy Futures, in having a strategic, methods-driven, entrepreneurial approach to bringing all these different stakeholders in with all valid interests, all valid opinions. It's not about pointing the finger at anybody. It's about come in and let's sit around a table like this and let's discuss it. Let's thrash it out. Let's understand the problems. Let's understand the opportunities. Let's look at the areas of divergence and convergence. Let's work through that. Let's get consensus. And using design thinking and systems thinking and problem solving, let's co-create better policy, better ideas, change behaviors in the ecosystem. And it's not about this wholesale one thing that will change it. It's kind of like if we just change things marginally in 6 places in that ecosystem, if we just changed academic research strategy by 10%, if we improved patient advocacy by 10%, if we had industry de-risk the regulatory data sets by 10%, if NICE, say, took a more pragmatic view by 10%, if we had better policy that, particularly in the UK, that wasn't just about an industrial lens, it was also about health. If these 6 things happened in the next 5 years, we would transform patient outcomes. We would transform the time it takes to get a drug from here to here, and industry would make more money, and that's okay, but they've got to give us value. They've got to give us better data. So that's what HTA Policy Futures is, more or less. We could talk about it for a week. We're going to talk about it for an hour. But that is HTA Policy Futures. There's lots more to say, but I'm going to stop talking and maybe just say, Carol, what is HTA Policy Futures, and why particularly, as someone is so esteemed as you with many demands and many things and opportunities, why are you involved?
It's a really interesting question that I've also had to think about because there are many places where policy discussions on HTA, industrial policy, health policy, life science policy happens. And I've come at this actually very much from a personal reflection, which is I didn't realize how much of a change agent I like to be. But as I look back at the things that I've done, everything that I've done there's usually something about something new, not been done before, probably a little bit challenging or a little bit provocative, and the ability to, as a consequence of that situation, to be able to do something creative and new. As a scientist working in R&D, I felt like that. When I first joined NICE, I felt like that. And throughout the history of NICE, as NICE has had to continue to evolve and adapt to the various political and economic environments that it finds itself in, I sort of strive for that creativity and change. And so as I came out of the public sector as an advisor, I was sort of looking around a little bit for where are those vehicles that really do allow great creativity to happen in the sector that I care about, which is life sciences, but particularly health technology assessment. And, I could spot pockets of that happening, but not a systematic place, a place where that systematic feeling that things do need to change and wanting to change happened. And that's when you had the conversation with me about what you want to do with Policy Futures. And I thought, well, it sounds interesting, but I'm not quite sure what it really means. And we've spent the last 12 months, 18 months exploring that. And I have now come to the view that if we can create a vehicle inside HTA Policy Futures that genuinely is about making impactful change and is genuinely about doing that in a way that involves all stakeholders on an equal basis and genuinely wants to produce practical outputs, then I'm absolutely up for that.
That's the goal. It won't be easy because lots of people have said to me, hey, this is too ambitious. But that's not a reason not to do it. There's many things that are in the too hard to fix box because we haven't had the methods, the approach. Timing's important as well. And I think now is the time to be ambitious and be courageous. And it's not like we're new to this. We've had 30, 40-year careers. We've learned a little bit about how to sell in and how to articulate and break down complex problems into its constituent parts so we get pragmatic solutions. So we'll come back to...
Just one more thing, because it's something that you said that really, really resonated with me. And again, from my experience at NICE, health technology assessment obviously just takes place at one particular part in that journey of a new technology from idea to implementation. But as I was doing my job at NICE and as we were creating the NICE technology appraisal process, it became very, very apparent that if we only concentrated on that little bit in doing our job, we couldn't actually do the job of HTA.
Yep, absolutely.
And so, many things came out of that. The introduction of NICE scientific advice and early scientific engagement, the vehicles that have developed now to have formal interactions between NICE and NHS England, those sorts of things, which means that you have HTA, but you have to start looking left and right, downstream, upstream,
100%.
in order to be able to ensure that what you're doing in any part of that system, so I'm using HTA as the example, but actually it's every single part of that system needs to be connected in the right way.
Absolutely. So
that's what the other reason that I'm interested in what you're talking about.
That's such an important reason. We'll park that for now because you steal the thunder for the next part of the discussion, which is why the HTA lens and what does that mean? But you've set that
But it's such a fundamental part of why the
100%.
Futures endeavour is probably different from other things.
That is exactly right. I think it's the biggest opportunity that we have, but it's also the risk, because if we don't articulate it well and people don't understand that it's not just about the methods and process of HTA, it's HTA as a concept and how it can recalibrate and be a catalyst in the whole ecosystem to do things differently. So we'll come back to that. But to go to Jean, the same question for you around, we've known each other and worked together for a long time. Between us, we've seen the good, the bad and the ugly right across and then we've got the scars to prove it. And it's frustrating because we can see the potential in the life sciences system, but when we come at it from the patient angle, it's sad and frustrating. It's not that we haven't moved the dial, and I get accused of this, but Eric, there's lots of things that have happened that are good. I'm not denying that, but actually, okay, we started here, we got to here, but we could have been there had we done it better and had the incentives been in the right place and had we collaborated, engaged early. And it's that missed opportunity that we should be so far forward than we are for patients. But the same questions to you. What is HTA Policy Futures for you? Why are you involved? And I think you're quite excited to be involved. So where does that excitement come from?
So for a long time, I thought that the HTA system doesn't work. Despite the fact that when I was at Cancer Backup, we took part in some of the first appraisals, and we actually got a change in the decision based on what we said and what others said too nice. But over the years, I've worked with patient groups, and I've seen that they struggle to engage in a way that means that their perspective is really taken into account in the decisions that are made. And I think that it's become a sort of adversarial situation where the patients feel they've got to fight to get access rather than they've got to negotiate and work with NICE and so forth. So for me, I think we have to change the system. And I've seen lots of things where people tweak around the edges, but they don't have what I believe you have, which is a vision for a different future. And it's that vision that I buy into. It's that vision that we will get effective treatments more quickly to patients. So patients benefit, the health system benefits, society benefits, pharma benefits because they sell their product. And for me, HTA Policy Futures is a real opportunity to make that change happen. Plus, I've worked with you for a good many years. So, you know, we always kind of come up with something good at the end of our debates, discussions, whatever you might like to call
Painful along the way. No, I'm only joking. But you raised some important points. I mean, a part of the frustrating thing a bit, and this is back to Carol's point about how I think we underuse the principles and tools and the concepts of HTA across the entire ecosystem, because it's very frustrating, again, just looking at this through a patient lens, and there are many lenses. And again, it's the beauty of HTA Policy Futures is bringing all these lenses together and understanding them, if you're only involving patients at the point in an HTA, it's almost, it is too late. There's a limit to what patients can do to change the issues. And there's a lot of criticism of HTA around how they work with and incorporate and deal with the kind of patient perspective. But actually, if you go all the way back, where was the involvement in the pivotal trial design?
Yeah.
And there are examples of many good companies involving patients in materially changing their trial, but it's the exception. It's absolutely not the rule. These trials are designed primarily to answer regulatory questions for the FDA in the US. That is a million miles away from the types of questions and challenges that HTA has. And if you translate that then into real world, meaningful, agile, responsive, personalized clinical practice, it's like, it just doesn't work. And yet that is our system. But we don't talk about it enough. You know, the arguments that we hear, the policy that we have to contend with, and there's lots of it recently that is really questionable, is driven by the person that shouts the loudest, that has the most ability to force and bully people to make policy changes. But when you look across the entire ecosystem, why would you do that? The unintended consequences of just arbitrarily raising NICE thresholds is really quite damaging. You can see the upsides of it, but who's thought about the downsides if you look at just primarily trying to promote and see commercial studies through an industrial lens is actually quite dangerous potentially to patients and future patients. Should we be open to doing more commercial studies? Absolutely. But it needs to be the right ones for the right reasons. There needs to be a prioritization mechanism we need to understand the opportunity cost of a patient going into a regulatory trial answering 2 questions versus an academic trial that might be answering 6 questions that are better for patients. There's no discussion about balanced portfolio. There's no discussion around how to incentivize and understand that relationship. And these are just small examples of multiple things that happen across the ecosystem that make it fragmented, disjointed, and leak value and not very patient-centric.
But the system is not good at engaging multiple stakeholders. You know, several years ago, the government did a review of an industry in relation to pharmaceutical delivery. And the sort of main theme was keep pharmaceutical companies away from the NHS, where my submission was get pharmaceutical companies closer to the NHS so they know what the important problems are and help to solve them, not just do a trial because somebody has found a bit of science in a cell and they think they can alter it. Actually, that's not what should drive delivery and research and development.
Yeah.
So Eric, you've gone in at the deep end with the comment about the nice threshold. So we might as well start there, and it's quite a good example of the perhaps difference in approach that I would see would happen in HTA Policy Futures to what has happened. So the nice threshold, it's an absolutely fantastic signal to industry that they matter, isn't it? It's a big global signal from the UK that industry matters in the UK.
It does. We're passionate about
so
industry.
if you are thinking about a policy change that has that type of impact, which is obviously the impact the government wanted, it's a pretty good policy lever. The issue is, again, as you've articulated really well, it is very, very difficult to predict the consequences of that change in the system as it evolves. But I predict that this change will have quite profound consequences in all sorts of places that we can't currently predict. And so what you would hope could happen inside something like an HTA Policy Futures vehicle is that if you're contemplating, you need to have big signals, because that's what needs. What would those signals be if you took a systems approach? And what would those systems be if you are applying, and we'll come on an HTA lens, which is a very holistic lens if you apply it in all of its facets. And therefore, what other policy vehicles do you need to then think about, in addition to that big one about industry matters, that you need to introduce either at the same time or at least in a planned way? And my sort of frustration perhaps over the years, and it's something in retrospect that you can't avoid, but it's an unfortunate way of doing it. It's almost the firefighting approach to policy change, is that, things hit the buffers and something has to be done. The next thing hits the buffer and something has to be done. Whereas just taking a step back and all of us thinking about what needs to be done holistically might at least give you a wish list of things that need to evolve in the future for the benefit of all of the actors in this really important system.
And actually having that list exist within the construct of effectively an institute and a think tank with everybody involved. Let's do the evidence. Let's do the research to prove or otherwise that list can work. Let's co-create solutions that are implementable and transactable by involving everybody at the beginning and applying methods. I mean, so many times we've all been invited to these things that, whether it's driven by industry or even the system or by patient organizations, when they see things through a single lens and create this argument and this sort of advocacy movement around indication-specific pricing, thresholds, whatever. And that report, I was very honoured and privileged to be able to meet with Andrew Dillon regularly. I think he just felt sorry for me. I don't know, but anyway, he was very kind and he let me speak to him regularly and often over many, many years. And we talk about this, and he would just reflect on how many times he put a report in the bin, because it's meaningless, it's futile, because there's nothing in it that speaks to NICE, that understands and appreciates and has accounted for the constraints that NICE has or the constraints that NHS England has. And this is the thing that singularly has been missing, is this sort of co-understanding and co-creation of solutions that are implementable and transactable. We've wasted, I think, decades and a gazillion pounds thinking about things differently. And I think and we've had the Accelerated Access Collaborative, and it had potential, but I remember it because I was involved right at the very beginning with George Freeman, and right at the very, very, very inception of it. And it had such hope for it, and it didn't work out, not least because I think they wanted to control the narrative a bit. So they had all the stakeholders divided up. They had all the industry in one day and all the doctors the next day, and it was just like, oh my God, what's happening here? It was such a missed opportunity. And of course, the stuff that came out of it, NHS England just looked at it and said, how is this going to happen?
But I'm sure people listening to this are going to say, but this is crazy. This, great ideas, very, very good to be creative and have, but that's not the way this works. That's not the way the system works. That's not the way change happens. That's not the way politics happens. And my response now is, why not? Why can't it be? Why can't it be that you pose a solution and before that solution actually lands as a consultation, you've actually stress tested it with each of the stakeholders, and you've seen the feedback that says, well, it might work that way and not. And so by design, you've got something at the end. Whoever initiates that policy thought or policy change, by the end, you've got something that at least has a chance of resonating with everybody.
It's such
I mean, that's the thing for me, is about, people, if you get the different stakeholders kind of all involved in something, then they're more likely to make the effort to implement it, to make it happen. The problem is kind of ownership of, if you have an idea and you try and push it, it's not my idea.
It's not your idea.
So am I going to take part in it? And so you have to avoid that situation, and actually bringing people together, I think, is a real opportunity to do that. You have to have frank conversations in that opportunity. I sat years ago and chaired an ad board for a company around breast cancer, and people were saying things, and I pointed at one of the women and I said, breast cancer oncologist, that's not what you said to me before this started. And she said what she really thought, but people don't. They say kind of what they think is safe in that space. They say what, will protect their position, etc. And this is where we need Eric's kind of drive to make sure that doesn't happen.
So first and foremost, one of the constructs and principles of HTA Policy Futures is an academic effort. It's not passionate people like us that are angry and frustrated.
Well, it's also passionate.
Yeah, no, it is, because you need passion. It's one of our values. And you need courage.
Can't lose that.
But you need methods. You need discipline. You need a strategic and entrepreneurial approach. And we built all that into HTA Policy Futures so that it's not a marketing exercise, it's a proper academic effort to do meaningful things. It's not about pointing the finger at any one stakeholder. Whichever stakeholder you look at, they do things well and they do things not well. Even the holier-than-thou patient advocates do not do everything well.
Absolutely.
So none of us are perfect. We're not pointing the finger at industry. We're not pointing the finger at NICE. It's not about that. It's about saying, look, actually, what do we do well? What don't we do so well? Where's that room for improvement?
What can we do better?
And what can we do better? And to create an environment that allows people to feel safe and feel trusted, that they can say what they need to say from the perspective of that stakeholder group from which they come, and to have the courage to listen to what other stakeholders need to say. And by doing good facilitation and good consensus building, round tables like this, virtual or face-to-face, let's hear it. And let's say, okay, well, how do we maximize that opportunity? Or how do we deal with that issue from pharma? Or how do we deal with that issue from the system and co-create using design and systems thinking, implementable and transactable solutions? This, I don't think, has been done before. I mean, the closest we get sometimes is nice methods reviews. That's the closest we get to getting everybody in the room, but it's so emotionally charged, it's so constrained, because at the end of the day, NICE, I think, have very little wriggle room to innovate and create, because they've got Treasury DH ministers and accountability on that side, and let's just say, again, all vested interest in different things going on there, the industrial lens and all kinds of crazy things that go on this side. And you've got NHS England on the other side saying, well, this is all fine, but you do know we've got finite resources and we don't have a lot of money. So, you know what, yeah, do stuff, but it can't cost us more than we have. So there's very, very little room for, I think, NICE. And I think NICE unfairly over the years have been put in very difficult position by the stakeholders either side of them, and have sort of been the dumping ground for bad policy. So even NICE methods review is not the best place. It's not an appropriate place to have the types of discussions that we have. And I think we can create a very different construct to bring people in, from investors, from ethicists, to social scientists, to Treasury, to really thrash it out.
So I'd take a slightly different view on the dumping grounds that is NICE.
Yeah, I think in reflection I probably would use different words.
No, I think it's quite a useful statement, because there is no doubt that things have landed on the doors of NICE and other HTA bodies, which you sort of think, gosh, that's tricky. How are they going to deal with that, or how's that going to happen? But I think that's a slight inevitability of the position that HTA bodies like NICE, certainly that have both the sort of the analytical and the decision-making capabilities in one organisation. That's the situation they find themselves in, because they are in the middle of all of these things, and there are the pressures bearing down on them, and they're pulling different ways. And I think for me, one of the things that I've sort of seen evolve over time is the wriggle room that a body has probably decreases over time, not increases over time. And that's because, firstly, people understand the role that that particular body has in the system, but also they know how to interact with the system for their own purposes, which means that, you know, in my view, it's very, very difficult for NICE now to act totally independently, which is how it was set up.
Sure.
Because the system itself now has a much tighter grip and understanding of how NICE works and what it does, by design, transparent. And therefore, it becomes very, very difficult to effect real transformative change from within.
Yep.
Which is, again, one of the reasons that I'm very, very excited by a concept like HTA Policy Futures, which, again, the absolutely intent is to be rather transformative and you know, sometimes quite provocative, very innovative in its thinking, to be able to offer up ideas and concepts that others can then take. That's for me, that's something that's now inside many of the very well-renowned institutions that formed the HTA world. It's very difficult for them to do that.
All right. So just to follow up on your point, Eckhart, and we'll talk about this not endlessly, but in great depth with multiple stakeholders throughout the work that we do in HTA Policy Futures, but we obviously want to work with system partners, including with NICE. There's other HTA bodies that are, there's people in our thought leadership group from all over the world, from other HTA bodies that are as excited and intrigued and committed to the vision as you guys are. But some of the informal discussions we've had with colleagues at NHS England and at night, and it's not a stress, a formal position that they've taken. It's one of interest and intrigue and actually excitement, because, you know, I've heard this several times saying, well, actually, it's really great that you're doing this because we can come in and have the conversations we want to have in a different environment. And we find it difficult to have in our own environment because of the constraints that we have. And hopefully that's the same for all stakeholders, as they feel trusted and enabled to come to the table and to have these discussions. And I think one of the other things that we haven't touched on, and I learned this from many, many people in my career that are way smarter than me, around the difference between a real thing and a concept. And they said, Eric, you scare people with your vision sometimes and your passion, and they don't disagree with you, but I've heard this so many times that, it's great, Eric, it's so super well thought through and logical, it will never work though, you know? Keep it in the concept box for now, and it's smart advice. So a lot of what we're trying to do is to think about conceptual design of a new system architecture, so people don't get frightened off. And we keep it conceptual, say, well, what if? And then collectively the group over time can say, okay, we're comfortable with this. We've got the evidence. We've stress tested this recommendation or solution. Let's work together and take it out of the concept box into the real world box. And I might as well scare people off. Look, these guys are crazy. It's just a talking shop. That is not what this is. It's a really meaningful attempt to change.
It's really got to be that multi-stakeholder base, so that it's not just coming from one or two people with an idea. It's that anybody who's engaged in the whole process of getting innovative medicines to patients can come and say, you know, here's an idea that I think will work, and you can use HTA Policy Futures to, as you say, stress test it. But I think, you know, it's kind of that broad collaboration that is likely to throw up some ideas that people think are crazy, but might actually just make a difference.
And that's a really important point, Jean, because the way that we've sort of constructed the governance and transparency around HTA Policy Futures is that it isn't driven by 2 people or 3 people. It's like we have our operating team at ELC, we've got the leadership group, that's a small group of like-minded individuals. Then we've got about 50 or 60 people from across the entire life sciences ecosystem in our thought leadership group. And they have a role in holding the mirror up, making sure that their perspective is accounted for and included in how we build out programs and services and research. As I say, they hold that mirror up. And then there'll be, thematic themes that will run through all of our programs and services that link back to the summit that we'll talk about later on today. So this is inclusive, and it's driven. We've created the vehicle to allow people to come in to drive it forward in a methods-driven, co-decided way, and I think that's quite unique. So we may agree or disagree with what comes out. That's not the point. It is the collective view, applying methods, applying systematic thinking, having a strategic framework, having great consistent facilitation across everything we do. It's a proper democracy, but there will be rigor and there will be discipline so that we don't build a club of crazy ideas. We'll push back and say, have you thought that through? That's where the facilitation comes from. So then what comes out the other end should be credible. It should be robust. It should be evidence-based, and much harder to ignore than previous efforts, because it hasn't come from a single voice or the funder of a particular project without the methods, without the academic rigor. And therefore we have a chance that whatever comes out the other end can make a change somewhere in the system, big or small. But it's like the whole British cycling thing, marginal gains, it's overused and people have got different views on it. What it means really, really well, it might just be, as Chris Hoy said, they realised that they didn't sleep well when they were away, so they took their own mattresses. Just simple little things like that can give you the extra 5% or 2% that could mean the difference between a 70% discount or a 30% discount, or a patient having an 80% chance of getting the outcome versus a 60% chance of getting the outcome. And that is super important.
The other important thing I think, and it's one of the hardest to get round in this HTA Policy Futures concept, is that it's not just about HTA.
Yeah.
Quite difficult to get your head around when we keep using the word HTA, but it isn't just about that bit of the process of the development of the chain. It's about how the various impacts on the way we do things across that chain have an impact both on each other and on HTA.
Yeah.
And I'm still working out how to explain that.
Well, that's our next discussion, Carol. So you've got about 5 minutes and a bio break and a coffee to figure that out, because it is so important. And listen, this is our very first, and it may feel like that to the audience as well, because it might not be super slick, but we've done our best. But this is our first of what will be many, many, many podcasts and webinars and different things within HTA Talks. We've got different themes that we'll explain at some other time. We'll have more people around the table in the future. And it may take us 6-12 months to really fully articulate and explain and us all to understand exactly the length and breadth and the opportunity in HTA Policy Futures. But we've made a start today, which is great.
I think the thing is that it will take a year, because as people become more involved, they'll all pose different questions. You know, they won't have, like Carol's been involved for, you said, a year to think about it.
People coming on board now need the time to think about what does it really mean. So you'll be doing this for at least a year, Eric, as people get new thoughts and questions and challenges.
And we'll have that forever, because we want the challenge. New things will come up. But I think what we've done in the last 40 minutes or so is made a start. I think it's helped us articulate publicly what we're trying to do, why we're doing it, and where our passion comes from. And I think it kind of makes sense, but it would to us because we're a little bit biased, but we question it as well, to be fair, it's sometimes as well. And hopefully we've made a start for our audience. And the feedback we've had by and large from the thought leaders, from the institutions we've spoken to, we've got universities that want to come on as intellectual partners. While we're funding it initially, we're now starting to speak to philanthropy, patient organisation, pharmaceutical service providers and industry about getting funding. And these discussions are going really, really well. And what these discussions show is just similar levels of frustration, similar levels of desire and passion for change. And in some cases, I won't mention them by name because I'm not asked for the permission to do so. This is exactly how we think at this company. We need to be involved. So it's super, super exciting. But when we have a little break, we'll come back and we'll explore a little bit just what you said 2 seconds ago, Curtis. What is this HTA lens all about?
Okay.
So thanks.